I wanted to ask you a couple questions about relationships today. And specifically, why do they become so difficult at a certain point? And actually, I wanted to start off with, why do we attract the certain partners that we attract? Why do I get into a relationship with this person and not that person?
Right. That's such a good question. I think that when you look at relationships from the perspective of psychological and spiritual development, everything starts to fall into place, right? And so and that's how I look at them. And so when you are understanding that you're attracting somebody that is a direct match, if you will, to relationships that you've already had, say with your mom, your dad, your sister, your brother, an ex from high school or whatever, you start to realize the pattern is playing out. Same, oh, here we go again. I thought I was over this pattern, but here I go. I attracted the same man again, right? That's the question that a lot of people ask. Well, there's two ways to look at this. One is from the ego's perspective. Why is the ego doing that? And the other is from the soul's perspective. Why is the soul doing that, right? And they have different reasons for doing it. And so pretty much we're set up to attract what we already know, because ego does not like change, right? And ego doesn't want something it doesn't know. It wants something that it knows. So if it knows father, it's going to have you attract father. If it knows mother, it's going to have you attract mother, right? Because you know how to deal with that, and it's kind of lazy in that way. I don't want any more learning, right? So that's part of it. But the other part of it is to heal those aspects of ourselves that were broken, that are broken for all of us, that were set up in our childhood. Right? So almost everybody has a childhood story that has not the best setup for their relational history, right? What parents don't understand is that whatever they're doing with their child, they're actually laying the groundwork for that child's relationships later on, right? Relationship is a relationship. It doesn't matter whether it's with your spouse or a friend or a family member. Relationship, the actual construct and process of relationship is exactly the same. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, definitely.
And so what I'm saying is that the so the ego is going for the known, but the soul is going for the healing, right? And so we attract these people in our lives that are the same people that may have wounded us in our childhood, so that we can overcome that wound, right? So
it's so interesting. I mean, it's funny that the ego and the soul attract the same thing for opposite reasons.
Exactly. That's exactly right. That's exactly right, because that becomes the very expression of your healing. Right. So in a lot of cases, if you're with somebody who was abusive, like your father or mother or whatever, just to sort of use that as an example, it isn't that your healing is going to be with that person. It's that your wound is being revealed with that person.
And you do the healing yourself because you're conscious of the wound that is brought up.
Right. Exactly. And so the first step is to go, oh, wow, I keep attracting the alcoholic husband or boyfriend or whatever. And so your system is set up to do that. And so you have to get consciousness and self-awareness to realize my system is going to keep attracting this toxic relationship. I must overcome that and stop it, right? And so there's a lot of work there to just stop choosing. Stop allowing the system that's attracting the toxic relationship. Stop it, right? And then when you do that, then you get into the relationship that will then help you come to wholeness. And that's really what I want to spend most of the time talking about, is is that really what is the whole point of relationship is to come to wholeness.
Right. So what happens when you wake up? You're like, okay, I choose to learn what I need to learn from these past relationships. I don't need to learn that anymore. So I don't need to spend my time attracting those people anymore. So I choose to attract a new level or type of relationship to learn how to become whole. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think I want to dive into this part a little bit because it doesn't feel right. It feels wrong. What feels right is attracting the toxic relationship. And so there's an overriding of the system that has to go on, right? And that's the hardest part that I have coaching people to do, because like it doesn't feel right. You know, this one is attracting to me. This one is attracting, but so is, you know, alcohol to an alcoholic.
Right.
And it is a little like that, you know. And so there's a little bit of a shift here in the psyche to start attracting the opposite, if you will, in some ways, right? So we're really just trying to override the pattern.
Right. So how do you do that? How do you reboot the system? What does that kind of look like?
Well, the first thing is to realize that it isn't going to feel good. And the second thing is to stay in conscious choice. To stay in conscious choice, like realizing, oh, I just got attracted to this motorcycle guy with the leather jacket, and you know, and you know, he's smoking and he's drinking and he's a bad boy, right? We all, you know, right? Totally. I hear this all the time. I'm totally interested in that bad boy, but we know where that goes, right?
Oh. So we're saying no to the easy, desirable choice that has been there always. Then what do we say yes to?
So, and I want to also make another important distinction here. There's two parts to relational history. There is the relational history that is all about procreation, which is our first half of life. And probably I don't really spend that much time thinking about that or overriding that, because that is really super genetic. And so we might be attracted to somebody like our father because we're supposed to make babies with that and keep that particular lineage and gene pool going. I'm not talking about that at all. I'm really talking about the second half of life, when you're really interested in psychological, spiritual, and co-creative development.
Yes. Which is a huge part of evolution.
Well, spiritual evolution, right? And conscious evolution, maybe not so much animal evolution, right? And so there's a difference. And again, what we're really talking about the difference between what ego and material and, you know, biological drives us to do versus what spiritual and psychological drives us to do. These are why these things are at odds with each other. You know, are we material beings, physical beings, or are we spiritual beings having a physical life? And I believe we're the latter.
Right. So when you choose a partnership, it's going to be a conscious choice to evolve on a spiritual level?
Yeah, right. And I often use the word psychological and spiritual to mean the same thing, because they're on a continuum, basically. When I talk about psyche, I really am talking about the non-physical aspect of ourselves, not the brain. Some people think that I'm talking about the brain, but I'm not.
Okay. So on like a stereotypical level, I would hear that and think, oh, well, I gotta go get a yoga teacher, or I gotta go get like the guru and like learn what they learn or know and date them. But I also feel like underneath that, it could be any type of person that's going to help you evolve in a certain aspect in your life that you need to evolve in.
Yeah, and I think that the thing that I'm really talking to people about the most is perhaps the most important quality of the person that you want in your life for this co-creative journey is someone who's also on the journey, right? Someone who sees that we are souls on an ascension journey, versus someone who is really happy with, you know, accumulating material goods for the end of their life or whatever. You know, that just isn't interesting. And they're going to be driven by ego and ego development versus someone who's driven by soul and soul development. And so because those are at odds with each other, like we just talked about, that's not the best person to be with if you're on the spiritual path.
So it's someone you can have a soul conversation with. It's someone who can talk to themselves on a soul level and say, is it time to wake up in this aspect of my being? Someone who could really ask themselves that question.
Yeah, that's right. And so now I want to say that does not mean that you're not going to have a beautiful sort of sexual and chemistry relationship with that person. In fact, I think you'll have an even bigger and better relationship with them in that way. If you're finding that you're both on the psychological and spiritual development path, and that each is managing their own development, and you don't have to go, I get this all the time, how do I change my husband? You change yourself, not your husband, right? So if both people are you know, doing that, then there's so much more intimacy and vulnerability and safety and security in the relationship, which allows for the sexual and the chemistry to sort of just be even better.
And I think that adds to the communication between the two and adds to all of the intimacy as well.
Right, exactly. And the communication becomes not, you know, like, you did this to me. It's like, hey baby, this is what I'm working on right now. I've got this little psychological shadow thing I'm working on, or I'm trying to learn how to take these projections back, or whatever it happens to be. You're sharing that with your partner, you know? And they're just witnessing. They're witnessing, and they're like, baby, I'm rooting for you. I'm rooting for you. You know what I mean?
And so supportive of each other. That's how you help each other grow.
That's exactly right. And unfortunately, we do the opposite here, you know. And when you just make this switch, when you make this switch from my partner completes me to my partner helps me understand how I'm supposed to go and become whole, everything switches. Everything switches. You're not trying to get your partner to do something because you have a lack that they're making up for, but they're not actually making up for it in the way you want it to, so you need to manipulate them. No, actually take it back. Figure out how to become whole, and just be grateful that they're showing you a part of you that you need to own.
Wow. That is something that I feel like most of us aspire to or desire in relationships. So not to say that there won't be any problems anymore. It's just that the communication will be more clear and the support will be more abundant in that relationship. So when you do have a problem, it's kind of exciting because then you get to figure it out together and then grow from there and actually bond on a stronger way.
Exactly. Exactly. And I really think that, you know, where a lot of couples get off this path, or maybe never on this path, is that they've bought into the idea that they're building the horizontal life that we've talked about before. I'm supposed to go to work and make all this money and have 15 houses and all these big giant cars. And basically they find that that doesn't satisfy them, right? Mm. And so when you find that that doesn't satisfy you, you end up starting to project on your relationship all that's wrong with your life onto your partner. Like, it's her fault, it's his fault, right? And really, that's the beginning of you realizing I need to wake up and live my life differently.
Taking back all those projections, understanding where those projections come from, understanding why you're embodying those core childhood relationships, and that's why you're attracting these sort of relationships. And then you say, oh, I don't want to do that repetitive kind of lesson anymore, because you're waking up to it. You realize it's not fulfilling, and then so then you work on yourself, and you say, that's not what I want. And then as you're doing the work, I feel like you would attract someone who's doing the work as well.
That's exactly right. So you're changing, and that's really the question you asked before that I didn't answer because we went on another direction. But actually, by changing, by consciously overriding the pattern that was attracting, you are then setting a new pattern, right? And so you're going from a toxic pattern to a more co-creative pattern. And you're right, you start to, change what I focus on, what I do in my life, what my hobbies are, blah, blah, blah. All of a sudden now you're attracting somebody that is in alignment with that.
I have a question. So what if you're in, I found myself in a couple different relationships where I felt like I was growing faster than the other person, even though they could come to that realization, oh, okay, I need to work on this, I need to stop projecting onto my partner. But I realized it was just a little too slow, I guess, or just behind. What is that like?
Well, I think my answer is kind of callous. Because I feel like you kind of need to be evenly matched in your responsibility for psychological and spiritual development. And so if you are growing faster, it's not about growing faster, it's about, is that person really engaged in doing the work? Because that's usually the problem. It isn't that one's growing faster than the other, because you do kind of go back and forth, and you kind of want that, because if you're both growing and causing chaos in the relationship, then one person isn't able to hold while the other person's going through whatever they're going through. So you do want some leapfroggy kind of stuff going on in a spiritual development relationship. But usually what's happening is one person is on the spiritual path, on the psychological development path, and the other one is just talking the talk but not actually doing the work.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And unfortunately, what I've found is leave that relationship. Find one that's actually more aligned, because that's why I said my answer might be callous. Because some people are awake and on the journey and some people aren't. Get with the people that are awake and on the journey. It's hard enough. It's hard enough with two awake people than to be with one who's awake and one who's not awake.
And in the end, it's going to be more supportive. I mean, why wouldn't you want that kind of relationship anyway? So, and they're going to be able to understand you more than this other person.
I want to talk a little bit about that, because what you often find in the relationship that is not spiritually aligned, or let me say it differently. When you're in a relationship that isn't focused on each person becoming psychologically whole, you are then in a relationship where the other person completes me. And then what happens is the husband wants the wife, and the wife needs to do X, Y, and Z to make the husband whole. And she is essentially an extension of him, rather than him taking all that on and becoming whole in and of himself. And so you constantly see relationships like that.
That's kind of a nice tool to kind of put in my head, because then it's black and white. It is or it isn't. So when I look at my life, I can say, oh, I'm in this pattern, or oh, I'm not. Okay. And then I can go from there with making choices.
And there's a subtle difference here. So as women, we want our men to be the provider or the man of the house or whatever, you know? And so we kind of force him in this pattern of masculinity, right? Which then keeps us in a pattern of femininity. And then neither learns the other, right? Right? And that's what I'm talking about. You know, that's one aspect of the Jungian psychological stages of development, is to go from working on your shadow to then working on, you know, the other gender, becoming and embodying a lot of the other qualities so that you're a whole being.
Because we are both feminine and masculine, no matter which gender you choose to identify yourself as.
We really are. We really are. And that's been known for thousands and thousands of years, that we are. That's part of what brings us to wholeness.
Yeah. So instead of playing this game of role playing, you are really living your whole self instead of living in these constructs or boxes that we're taught that that's what we should be doing.
Yeah, and again, everything is subtle. I always look at the subtleties here. So we're not talking about, men and women are supposed to become androgynous beings. We are not talking about that. We want to have access to all of those qualities of being, but and own all of that and not need that from our partner. But still, opposites attract. So we still want masculine and feminine to come together in this beautiful sort of love-making experience. But we want it to be out of choice and not out of need. And that's really, really super important for everybody to get, because it's a subtle difference.
Right. So
it's like, I don't need you to be like this big burly man, right? Because I can take care of myself. There's one piece. But I do want you to be this big burly man, right?
right. Because it's fun to be around.
Exactly. So it's a huge difference between needing it and wanting it, right? And this is the problem that I keep seeing over and over and over and over and over again in heterosexual relationships. They don't know the difference between the projection of, I want my man or my woman to be X, Y, and Z, versus owning it all and then, sort of then being able to embody any of these qualities.
Right. So could you say like needing something is more of like the unconscious, and then wanting something is more of the conscious? Because
Totally.
Right. So in Jungian psychology, depth psychology, would you talk in terms of anima versus animus? So both are embodied in one human being. And so to incorporate both the feminine and masculine, the anima and the animus. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So anima is what Jung coined as the term for a man's inner feminine figure. And animus is the term he coined for a woman's inner masculine self, right? So he coined those terms, and his idea was that the woman was going to embody and befriend her inner masculine and become whole, and the man was going to befriend and become, if you will, his inner feminine and become whole. And that's really the second stage of Jungian individuation, is encountering this inner soul figure.
Which we're kind of touching on right now, of getting in touch with your inner opposite and becoming whole that way, and then saying, oh, but I still want these qualities around me which are opposite of me most of the time.
Yeah, and so the difference is you really, what we end up doing first and foremost, and this is really important, is that before we start doing this work of becoming whole through embodying our own anima or animus, is that we project our anima or animus onto our partner. We talked about this before with regards to the imago of the inner childhood family dynamics. But we project it, and then we want to manipulate it, right? So I see a lot of spouses being objectified by their partners because they're projecting their inner figure and they're trying to work it that way, and you don't work it that way. You have to then take that, oh my God, I'm projecting dad on you, I'm projecting mom on you, I'm projecting my own owned masculine qualities on you. Okay, let me take that back. You know, when you take that back and you become whole, can you imagine the relationship you can have? You're not manipulating each other, that's for sure.
Right. Absolutely. And there's less argument.
Right, right.
So I just want to put like a hard example in just for fun.
What's
So say I want someone who is like strong, like a warrior, courageous, confident. I want to embody that. But instead of saying, I can be confident, I can be warrior-like in whatever activity I'm doing, I want my man to do it instead. So this is an unconscious projection. So
right.
When he's not confident in a situation, or if he's not acting like the warrior that I want him to be, I'm going to get upset. And I'm saying, you're not the warrior. You're not my warrior. And
right.
then he's like, what are you talking about? I don't even know what warrior you're talking about. How would he know? Because it's my own imagination. It's my own interpretation of what warrior is. And so I say, oh, okay, I have to be the warrior. I take that back. Then I'm responsible for my own confidence and courage. And so when I take that back and I embody that, and then actually just by saying that, I realize while I'm doing that, it gives permission for the other partner to do the same as they witness the transformation that I've just went through.
That's right. That's right. We keep people locked in our projections. You know, there's a name for that. It's called projective identification. So if you're projecting father on your partner and you're not taking back that projection and integrating whatever those qualities are, then you're locking them in it, not only in your own mind, but that person, the other defense mechanism that we're talking about is the identification with your projection. In other words, all of a sudden they're like, I am becoming your father. Right. And it's not even in their sort of, understanding of who they are. I've caught myself doing this sometimes. And I'm like, I don't even feel that way. And yet I'm being, you know what I mean? Like I'm being projected on, like I'm being mother or father or whatever. And I'm like, wait a minute here. Stop it. Stop it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's some kind of weird twisted game or something.
It kind of is when you start to see it the way that I see it, but then when you see it the way I see it, then you know exactly what to do. You know what I mean? You start to see, oh, I just projected that, I need to bring this back. You know what I mean? Or, oh, I just identified with that person's projection, which is the other side of it. That's not who I am. So a lot of the project is really knowing who you are.
How do you do that? Like, I mean, I would assume, okay, what ignites your joy, and following that to understand who you are. I think that would be a start. How do you really know who you are unless you are engaged in relationship?
I think that's a good question. I think that's really important, is that the relationship does help you understand who you are. When you allow the other person to have a different opinion, and so you go, I'm walking around and I'm thinking this about myself, and the other person's like, yeah, that's not true. And you're like, oh my God, they just spoke the truth and I'm not seeing myself correctly. So you get another view of yourself. Like, okay, all right, back. So I think that I think the whole project here on earth is about coming to know who you are, you know. So when I start somebody out in that project, it's really just how does their ego function, which isn't really who they are, but you're not going to get to who you are unless you actually understand how the ego functions so that you can begin to transcend it, fix it and transcend it, both. You got to do both, you know. And so then when you ask the question, who am I, you know, ultimately you're like this huge whole self that is, you know, that is, you know, like, to use a spiritual term, a chip off the God block, if you will.
Right.
Another term we use is unity consciousness. We are literally growing back into unity consciousness, right?
Between the ego and the soul.
Right. The soul, the ego is, think of the ego as just the vehicle for this physical incarnation. The soul is who you really are. So the soul is what goes from life to life to life to life to life. It's the one that accumulates, you know, all the learning, etc. Ego is just the vehicle that is here for you to experience certain lessons that you decided to experience in this incarnation, and it sets it all up, right? But it's not who you really are. It's just the car that you're driving in, so to speak.
Yeah, or could you say even like a gatekeeper of some sorts? Because,
Go tell me more about that.
well, I say sometimes the ego saying no to your soul, your instincts, because of past incidences. So it's kind of like a protector, but it's not working with the soul in that way. So you have to understand how to talk to the gatekeeper.
That's
To kind
right.
of through and do the work that you know needs to be done, which is interacting with the soul.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it. I like that, the gatekeeper. Yeah, and that is what you want to do. We're not trying to fight the gatekeeper. We want, you know, like with all mythological stories, you always bring a gift to the gatekeeper, right?
Oh my God, that's beautiful. So, and also I know from doing like meditations where you encounter a part of yourself, you know, an archetype of yourself, and you have to embrace it and love it. Like doing shadow work, you have to embrace it and love it before you can do the deep work. So that gift is saying, thank you for your work and keeping me protected.
Right.
But I know what's best because I am in touch with my soul.
Yeah, and so in that way, you're growing your ego up, right? And so along the way, I thought the work was really about transcending ego because that's what we learned from our Eastern brothers and sisters. But as I've been doing the work, I realized no, all we're really doing is trying to tinker with and grow the ego up because I'm always going to be using this vehicle, and so I want this vehicle to be as you know, as fine-tuned as it possibly can to do the work that it's supposed to do here on earth. And so you can train it. You can start that relationship. In fact, all of Jungian psychology, the end of the four stages is what we call the ego-soul axis. They're both in relationship with each other. Like ego has something to say because it knows earth, and soul has something to say because it knows the higher dimensions. So let's keep them in relationship with each other. That's the ultimate goal of Jungian psychology.
Which makes the most sense according to where we live and our reality here.
Exactly, exactly.
So to get to that point is doing the daily work of staying conscious and recognizing your choices and that you are in control of your life. You're responsible for what your life looks like based on your daily choices.
That's right. I mean, it really is a being present and knowing what to be present of.
Right. Right. No, and so, okay, so what are those things to know to be present to? Habits, I guess, or your past relationship
All of that.
Right. Okay.
All of that. And like I said, the first thing is to really know how your ego is functioning. Understand defense mechanisms, understand the patterns, understand the way that it distorts reality, because that's what it's doing. Why is it doing that? Beginning to understand all of that, understanding the relationship part that we're just talking about that. So the first part of this project is just understanding the system that I'm in, right? And see, I said that the way I said it was really important, because I said understanding the system that I'm in. Like, so in that, I'm not identifying with the ego, right? And that's what I'm trying to say right now, is the first thing is to realize that your ego is just a vehicle. It is not who you are.
Right. Right. I'm trying to think of like an example. Because I get it on a theoretical level. I'm just trying to put it into a physical example of what that would mean. So
I mean, let's work out a defense mechanism, because I think that's I think that would help. I mean, the ego, almost the entire way in which the ego structures is through defense mechanisms. That's the beauty of Freud's work, is that he understood that and he taught that to us. And a lot of the Freudians understand the way in which ego defenses structure our reality. Oh, that's unfortunate. I don't know how to turn that off. So I'll start that part again. Where was I?
How Freud was really good at bringing about defense mechanisms, and that's where you were going to start off.
Yeah, so I want to think of a defense. Have we worked on a defense? You and I worked on a defense mechanism with you?
Yeah, I think that, okay, so my experience of being abandoned, so my defense mechanism is abandoning that person. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's not a defense mechanism. So defense mechanisms are like identification, projection, repression. There's like a dozen of them. Altruism, narcotization, intellectualization. So there are all these ways. Defense mechanism in and of itself are ways in which reality is distorted to keep the ego safe. And so, for instance, let's see if we can think through.
I don't think we have worked one, but is there something that you've noticed that I do that would be?
Well, no, let's not work it on you. Let's use reaction formation. I think this is a little known defense mechanism, and it's one that I see a lot. And so let's talk about reaction formation. So because it's not, I mean, we rank defense mechanisms from psychotic to healthy. And so in the middle range is this thing called reaction formation. And what it does, and you see this a lot in the New Age community, where I'm only going towards the light. I love the light. Everything is light and beautiful. And keep the bad out of my sight. And so something could happen to them that is actually not good, but reaction formation basically has them turn it into its opposite. And so you constantly see people interpreting the world around them, and you're like, that's not actually what happened. But yet they see it that way. And that is a defense mechanism of reaction formation. And part of that is built on this idea that negative, dark, shadow, evil, the only way to get rid of it is to make sure I see only love and light. We see that so much in the New Age movement. Right? Yeah. And a lot of people don't even know that they have reaction formation as a defense mechanism.
Yeah. I know people exactly like that.
Right? And so the way that so again, everything that I'm always pointing out is subtleties because, on one hand, I'm not saying, stay in the dark. I do want us to make choices that says, I'm going to see the light in this. So it's not the same as using it as a defense mechanism to see the light in it, because the latter, the one that I just talked about, is denying the darkness altogether. Right? It doesn't exist. It's not there. I'm transforming this reality into love and light. Right? That's a defense mechanism. Versus, I see the light and the dark, like what's going on in the world today, and I'm just going to choose to walk towards the light instead of the dark. I'm going to choose to not pay attention to the news, who's using fear porn all the time. I know it's there. I'm not denying it. But I'm going to choose to bring love and light in my life. See, there's a difference. That's not reaction formation.
Right. Because there's consciousness. There's a conscious choice involved.
Correct. So that's, and what'd you say?
And acceptance.
And acceptance, yeah. And so there's lots of defense mechanisms. And most of the time, these defense mechanisms have been put in place because it wasn't safe for your soul to come out. And so you find the personality structured and all these defenses to keep the inner child or the soul safe, right? And so in order to actually do soul work, you have to break down the defense mechanisms.
To understand who you really are, because you're attaching yourself to that defense mechanism, saying that's me, but it's really not. And it's, again, you got to talk to your ego like the gatekeeper and say, thank you for keeping me safe, but I don't identify with this anymore.
Exactly. And the great thing about the ego is it learns. It's like, that's logical. I'll make that change. Thank you. You know what I mean? So it's a dialogical relationship with ego. We don't have to fight it.
Right. Because that's the ultimate goal, to work together with it.
Right.
And so you really, first up, really need to understand your defense mechanisms. And what better way to understand your defense mechanisms than to be in a relationship?
Right, because because what we really want in relationship is, we don't want personalities to be in love with personalities. We want souls to be in love with souls. That's what it means to be a soulmate or a twin flame.
Ah, that's great. Do you think that you can attract a soulmate without first having done the work or being conscious of the work that needs to be done?
Yeah, I do. Definitely. Yeah.
Oh, and then hopefully you do the work.
Yeah. Hopefully it stirs you into doing the work,
Right.
And I think in my own life, I've had many relationships where I definitely stirred the work, but unfortunately we didn't stick around to actually take advantage of the work. And that, so in my own life, I've learned the importance of being patient.
Oh, I know. That's a big one.
Yeah. It's really hard to date a psychologist too.
I learned that watching Antichrist. That's a joke.
Anyway, so it really is, because, and that's the thing about being a psychologist and being in a relationship, is that you see everything, and I had to learn early on, keep your friggin' mouth shut, right? Because it doesn't matter whether I see it. It only matters, so I've practiced what I'm talking about. In other words, I'm managing my side. Even though I can see that you're in this defense mechanism or you're in this pattern or whatever, unless the other person sees it, it doesn't matter. Like, just be patient and hold them in their highest and know that they're moving to their highest. And that's your wish. You do not try to teach them the lesson. That's their job.
Right. But as you're leapfrogging kind of
Right.
with your own growth, so to speak, making sure that it's consistent speed for both, or at least that and I guess that comes down to the point you already made, which is making sure they're doing their work too.
Exactly. That's really important. That's really important because otherwise, they stagnate and they will hold you back. They will hold you back. And so then you got to decide whether or not you're in it for the horizontal or you're in it for the vertical. Am I in it for just, living life until I die on planet Earth? Or am I in it for enlightenment, for ascension, for whatever's next, the higher dimensions?
Mm. Wow, I'm just thinking about how much love that kind of relationship can encompass. There's so many layers and aspects of love that you can be privy to when you are on that vertical.
Yeah, that's so important. And I read something the other day where a channeled material was talking about you guys have love about the size of a quarter inch. And the higher beings have love about 9 feet. So we have a lot of love, and this is human love, right? And so they're like, so when I think about what our job is in Ascension, it is a love project. It is the love of self and others. And that's what it means to be a bodhisattva, too.
And it starts with the self.
Starts with self.
So doing this depth psychology work is so important.
Right. Definitely.